You had asked me how much money we owed at that time, I would have probably said about 16 to 20,000. Still a lot of money, but not the 36,000 that it ended up being.
How did this debt come about?
When it comes to debt and other people's money, it's so easy to spend that money. You become a lot more liberal than you would if it was your own hard-earned cash.
The £36,000,
Yeah.
it was a mixture of personal loans, credit cards,
Yeah, overdrafts, exactly, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Wherever we could get that extra money, we were getting that money and we were spending it.
Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, Stephanie Obeng, and today I'm joined with financial coach and content creator, Tolu Frimpong. Tolu, thank you so much for making the time to join me today on this
Well,
podcast.
thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it because I know how busy you are. One of the things I'm keen to do on this platform is to help my audience develop confidence with their personal finances. Unfortunately, money management and personal finance isn't taught in our schools. So it's up to us to take responsibility to educate ourselves about money and our personal finances so that we can become more confident and feel more empowered.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get straight into the discussion. Tolu, arguably, I can say that now you're in a position of financial confidence, but it wasn't always this way. Can you take us back to the time when you were £36,000 in debt? How did this debt come about?
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's go back down memory lane a little bit. So the debt was accumulated over the space of about a year when my husband and I bought our first home. So at that time, we had saved up the money that we needed for the house deposit, stamp duty fees, surveyor fees, all those fees associated with buying a home. We'd saved that money. And between us going to buy the house and doing the exchange, so getting the key, there was a big year gap. And the reason for that is the people selling the property basically were not in agreement as to whether or not to sell. So there was a bit of a dispute there. So it just delayed the whole process, right? So a year later, finally do the exchange, time to get the keys, go to look at the flat or the house rather one more time, and the house was in disarray. I'm talking the kitchen roof had caved in. The house was just not being kept. I don't know. It's like lodgers or squatters, sorry, were in the property at the time or something. So the house just was not habitable whatsoever. So at that time, we was like, okay, what are we going to do? Because we need to move into this house. We've been living with my in-laws for 3 years. That's a story for another day. But we had literally got to the point that we needed to move out into this new home, but we didn't have the finances for refurbishment. That wasn't in the plan. The plan initially was just to move into the house and do it up bit by bit. But at that stage, it wasn't habitable, so we couldn't do that. So I remember at the time we had friends who at that time had also bought a property, and what they had done is they had got lodgers into their house. So they basically had lodgers that were renting out spare rooms in their house and paying them money. So we thought we'll do the same thing. We would get lodgers to rent out our spare rooms, and then we'll take out loans to refurbish the property, and then the lodgers would basically cover the cost of that loan and would cover the mortgage. See, it sounds like a good plan, right? But I don't think we had a plan B. We just had that plan A. So on paper, it seemed like it made sense. We'll have the lodgers pay off these loans, and then we would pay the mortgage and everything will be fine. So we took out the initial loan. That wasn't enough. We took out a second loan. And as if that wasn't enough, we went on a couple of holidays. We spent money on furnishing the house on credit. We just got a bit carried away. I think that's one thing when it comes to debt and other people's money. It's so easy to spend that money. You become a lot more liberal than you would if it was your own hard-earned cash.
Sorry.
Go on.
So just to rewind. So
Yeah.
the £36,000,
Yeah.
it was a mixture of personal loans, credit cards,
Yeah, overdrafts, exactly, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Wherever we could get that extra money, we were getting that money and we were spending it. And I think because we had this master plan that someone else was going to pay that debt for us, we were a lot more ruthless with our spending, or reckless rather, with our spending. And yeah, at that time, to be fair, I didn't realize it was that much debt we had. Like, if you had asked me how much money we owed at that time, I would have probably said about 16 to 20,000. Still a lot of money, but not the 36,000 that it ended up being.
Okay, and so what was the trigger point where you and your husband at the time said, enough is enough? We need to do something about this debt. We need to clear this.
Do you know what? For a while, we were just burying our heads in the sand. So from the outside looking in, you wouldn't even know we had any debt because we were still living lives as normal. We just were able to get our hands on extra money and just kind of make it happen and make it work. But it was getting to the point we knew what was going on in our home. The fact that monthly when our mortgage payment was due, we weren't making the payments on time. So we were ending up not paying it until the second time. So the way the bank does it is it gives you a second chance to pay it before they now start writing you letters. So we wouldn't pay it on the first attempt, would pay it on the second attempt. So it was starting to get quite peak at that time. And we're like, okay, all of this work we've done in trying to get this first house is basically gonna come to nothing and we're gonna lose everything if we don't do something about it. But we still didn't really know what to do about it, but we knew this can't continue. And I remember at that time, my husband was quite into personal development. So he was reading a lot of personal development books at the time. Every other week, he'll tell me about this new book he's read. He's like, babe, you need to read this. And I'm like, yeah, I'll read it. I never read any of those books. However, one book he did mention to me was The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. He was like, no, babe, you need to read this book. And I don't know what it was that made me say, actually, I will read this book because I never read any of the rest of them. But something about that book just stood out to me. I was like, okay, let me read it. And when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what we need. We need a total money makeover. Because I think up until that point, I didn't think there was a way out of that situation. So I just buried my head in the sand and kind of ignored it. But upon reading that book and seeing the baby steps that he outlines in the book that you can take to achieve debt freedom, that's when I realized actually there is a way out of this if we do the work.
Okay. And so whilst you were accumulating this debt and you knew you had this debt that you had to clear, did that have a impact, like a negative impact on your marriage at the time, or you guys were just, it was just a smooth process?
To be honest, yeah, you would think it would be worse in the house than it was. Like if you came to our house at the time or you was around us at the time, you wouldn't know anything was going on. And even when we were at home and there was nobody around, we just didn't talk about it. So it just was, I guess, the elephant in the room. We just ignored it and just continued as we could, as we did, because we were still able to get by just about. So it's like, oh, this bill's come up. Okay, we can put on that card, put on this card. And we were just literally like moving things around to make it work. So that's how we were doing it. So even though it was such a bad situation we were in, I think because it never reached breaking point, we never had to really address it urgently, if that makes sense. So even though it was an urgent situation, because we were always finding a way out, it was fine and it didn't put the pressure on that marriage that you would think it would put. I think if it was a case of the second time when we went to pay the mortgage and it didn't go through, I think then we would have realized a bit more that okay, something is going on here,
Okay.
and it would have been a lot more pressurized. But at that time, my husband used to get paid weekly, so we was always able to kind of make it happen. So it wouldn't come through. We wouldn't pay it on the first week, but 2 weeks later when they retry it, it's like, okay, he's been paid enough, so we can pay the mortgage. So yeah, it was just a lot of kind of moving money around and trying to
That's
make
actually
it
quite good to
work.
hear because obviously, finances is one of the top three reasons for,
Exactly.
marriage and relationship breakdown. So going back to this book, so you read the book and you said to yourselves, we need to do something about our
Mm.
finances. Okay. And so what approach did you take? I'm aware there's a snowball and avalanche method to, tackling debt.
Mhm.
Was that the method that you decided to take?
Yeah, so the first thing that you have to do basically, you don't have to do, but the first thing the book advises you do is take stock of actually how much you owe to who. And that was the moment when we realized, oh wow, this is actually a bigger situation than we thought it was, because you have to write down all the debt that you have, all the different creditors, how much you owe to them, how much interest is owed to them, the amount of the debt, and just literally list it all out. And that was when we realized that it was 36,000, it's like 600 and something pounds in total. So we wrote that all on paper and you do it. We decided to go for the snowball method, which is basically where you pay all the minimum payments on all of your debts. And the first debt at the top, the smallest debt amount, you overpay as much as you can.
Can.
And then once that one is cleared, that overpayments that you were putting plus the minimum payments, you put that to the second one and you keep doing it. And what it does is it creates a snowball effect. Now, that isn't the best way in terms of maths. So you pay more in interest that way. But what it does do is it gives you that motivation to keep going on that debt free journey. Because I think sometimes when the interest amount is on the greatest amount of debt, it can be quite overwhelming to the point that you think, oh, there's no point me trying because I'm never going to get out of debt. But actually, when we were able to pay off the first credit card, which was about £2,500, I think 3,000 at the time, when we paid that off and were able to call the credit card company and be like, oh yeah, cancel that card, it gave us that boost and that motivation to be like, okay, we can actually keep going. But to be able to find those overpayments, to the extra money to make those overpayments, we needed to do a budget. So once we'd listed all the money that we owed to who, we came up with a plan as to how we was going to pay it all off. We had to create a budget. And what that looks like is understanding your numbers. So I think before that time, we used to budget in our head. So we've always said that we budgeted, but actually we weren't budgeting. We were just kind of managing the money somehow. But there was no plan ahead of that money. It was more the money came in and the money went wherever it needed to go. We weren't intentional about telling the money what to do. And it was only when we was like, okay, no, we're gonna actually do this thing and do it properly, that we had to create a budget and put ourselves on a plan. And then when you did the maths, this was back then though, this was like 5, 6 years ago. Now budgets are a lot different because of the cost of living and things are a lot
Yeah.
more expensive. But back then, it wasn't a case that we had an income problem, it was a spending problem. So actually, we had more than enough to cover our expenses. It's just that we were spending a lot of money recklessly without really realizing it. So yeah, that's a big thing that helped us, was creating that conscious spending plan, creating that budget and learning to delay gratification a little bit. So not just doing what we wanted when we wanted, being impulsive with our spending. It was very much being intentional and making a plan for that money.
So I'm conscious that I mentioned, snowball and avalanche
Sure,
as a concept. Can you just again explain in very basic
sure.
terms for the audience the difference between the snowball method
Yes.
and the avalanche method in terms of clearing debt?
Of course, yeah. So the debt snowball method is where you're basically listing all the debt that you owe and the people you owe it to, from the smallest amount of debt to the largest amount of debt. So let's just, for an example's sake, say you owe £100, £200, and £300. You list that in order of the smallest amount of debt, and you pay the minimum payments on those debts one, two, and three. And any extra money that you found in that new budget that you've created, you overpay as much as you can of that £100. Once you've paid off that £100, the next month or whenever that's cleared, you now overpay on the second amount until you've done it and it snowballs and you've paid it all off. Whereas the slight difference, or the main difference between the snowball and the avalanche, is that with the avalanche you're writing it from the highest interest to the lowest interest. So if the largest amount is the highest interest, that's what's going to go at the top of the list. And the lowest amount, if that's the lowest interest, that would be at the bottom of the list,
Okay. So then you tackle
irrespective
the highest interest
interest debt
first.
first, because then that way you're paying less interest overall on your debt. So a lot of people go for the avalanche just because it saves them a lot more money. But for people like me that need those quick wins, I went for the snowball method.
Okay, amazing. Okay, no, debt is a huge issue, and I
Mm.
know there's conversation topics about good debt and bad debt. In your view, what is the difference between good debt and bad
Mm.
debt?
Yeah, I think good debt does exist, but I think it should be approached with caution, because good debt can quickly turn into bad debt if things don't go according to plan. So, like, even with my example of when we initially got into debt, you could argue that that was good debt. Like, the refurbishments were going to be for the property, we're going to do up the property, that's going to add value to the property. If we wanted to remortgage later on, take money out, we would have added value to the property, but we hadn't anticipated the fact that we weren't going to be able to get lodgers in. So I didn't even mention that part of the story, but our plans to get lodgers into the property to pay off that loan fell through,
Oh wow.
because at that time I was pregnant with my second son and I had a toddler. And I guess once people heard there were kids in that house, they're like, no, 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 I don't want to come and live there. So literally,
Understandable.
yeah, exactly. If you're just a single person, you don't want to come and live in a house with young babies. So yeah, we struggled to get lodgers in. So that good debt suddenly turned bad. But equally, things like student loans, that can be seen as a good debt, right? You go to university, you study, you get your qualification, and then you can come out and get a good job. Without that qualification, you may have been unable to get
Yeah.
that job, right? But then arguably there's certain career paths that you could have taken without necessarily going to university. So actually, how good is that debt for you? So
Mm.
I think it's, yeah, there can be good debt, but I think you should just approach it with caution and understand that you're using that debt as leverage, and leverage can work for or against you depending on the situation.
And bad debt, what examples would you give of?
Okay, credit cards, of course, like things, payday loans, all of those things. Klarna, sorry, I shouldn't be calling that brands, but but those buy now, pay later, or part payment schemes, a lot of those things I would say are bad debt, because for example, food. Now you can actually buy food on payment plans, right? I would say that's bad debt, because
Wow.
why am I
So you
paying in
eat the
three
food.
installments for McDonald's that I and consumed?
So you eat the food now and pay later.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's where we are now. So even Boohoo, all these websites now, you can buy a dress on it for £10 and be paying for it in three part payments. I would say, to me, that's bad debt, because actually, do you really need to buy that item that badly? I'm sure you probably could find an alternative in your wardrobe if there wasn't that option to those finances or that payment plan, would you have bought that item? And if not, then maybe just wait and save up to until you can actually pay
Afford it.
for the full item. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So good debt when you're investing in yourself.
Yes.
So education arguably
It's good. I
is
can say it's
good
good
debt.
debt. Yeah, and even for businesses as well. So, if you start a business, you take out a business loan, that could be good debt, right? Because you take out that £10,000 loan and you're able to turn it into £100,000 through your business. But then equally, that same good debt that your business blooms, I could have done the same exact venture and my business didn't work out. So how
Yeah.
good
So
is
you
that
just have
debt?
to weigh it out.
Yeah, you
But
just
like general consumer spending for things that you don't necessarily need and
yes.
putting it onto a credit card arguably is bad debt.
I'd say so because you have to pay it back with interest and high interest at that. And it's like you're paying for your sins of your past in the future. So it's like your future you is not thanking you for those mistakes.
Understood. So I just want to go back to budgeting.
Hmm.
So in your view, you know, what is the role of budgeting in helping to effectively tackle debt?
It's knowing your numbers and telling your money what to do, getting in front of your money because you work hard for that money, right? So everybody else is enjoying the fruits of your labor and you're not. It doesn't make sense. So having that conscious spending plan, you're able to put that money towards the things that bring you value and are important to you rather than your money just slipping through your fingers and you have no accountability or no awareness of where that money has gone. So I think, yeah, budgeting gives you that power when it comes to your finances to make intentional decisions about what you want your money to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I'm honest, I only started budgeting a few years ago.
Yeah.
I just used to tap, tap, tap,
Yeah,
tap,
yeah, yeah.
tap. I try my best not to be too restrictive because I also
Yes.
want to live life.
Yes.
But I definitely every month sit down and track, what I've spent, whether it's
Mm,
groceries, transportation, entertainment. So that's all logged right from
mm,
January up until now. And I'll do the same up until December. So I can just see throughout the year and do a review as to
mm.
how I've spent money. And it's definitely something that I'm going to do going forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's extremely useful. So in terms of your clients then, how do you help your clients create an effective budget that basically works with their lifestyle?
Mm. I think the main thing is knowing your why and understanding what it is you want your money to do. So every client is different. Like for some people, their priorities are enjoyment. Like I work hard for my money. I just want to enjoy my life, right? Other people, they say their priorities are, their children's future, investing in their children's future and their education. So it's just letting them understand what are the goals that you're working towards and how can you use this money as a tool to achieve those goals. So that what that looks like is different between the two of us, right? And equally, it's different with every client that I work with because everyone's priorities are different and things that we place value on are different. So I don't think you should necessarily judge or condemn people for the decisions that they make when it comes to their budget. So I know even like on social media, you'll see like, if you stopped eating avocado and toast, maybe you could afford a house. And actually, that's not true. Everyone is different. And even if you stop eating avocado and toast today, it's still very hard to purchase a property. So I don't think that we should really like judge people in that way when it comes to spending decisions, because if that's something that makes you genuinely happy, why should you restrict yourself from doing it? But at the same time, you just need to understand whether you have the resources to do that, whether that thing, the avocado and toast, is of more importance, for example, than you going on this holiday that you said you want to go on next year. So it's really understanding where they want to go, what their
Mhm.
priorities are, what their goals are, what they want to use money as a tool to achieve versus the money that they actually have available. Because actually, sometimes as well, you have to be realistic with yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to do X, Y, and Z, but you only have money for X. So what's the main priority? And if you don't want to cut out any of those three things, what are you going to do to increase your income to be
Yeah.
able to achieve those goals? So it's just really having those honest conversations, because I think we just say stuff fluffily, that's not even a word, but we just say stuff without actually looking at the numbers and understanding what the money can do. And once you sit down and look at the numbers, you understand this is exactly what I have to work with. Then you can ask yourself those raw questions as to, okay, I'm going to allocate X amount to this category, that category, and the other. And what that looks like is different depending on literally everyone's circumstances and family setups.
Okay. So, as a financial coach, what's the first step that you recommend when someone comes to you and is feeling very, say, overwhelmed about their debt?
Mm.
What's the first thing that you would say?
I'd say to forgive yourself. So I think a lot of times there's a lot of shame associated with being in debt, and people just think, I'm the worst person in the world and I've made such a mess and there's no way out and I'm such a failure and all these things, these negative self talk that we have, and you think that you can't do it. So I think the first part of it is forgiving yourself for those whatever financial mistakes that you've made,
Mm.
and understanding that there is a way out, and accepting and believing that you can do it. You can change your financial situation. Where you are today doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be there a year from now if you're prepared to do the work. So it's really getting them to have that self-belief at the beginning, forgive themselves, rid themselves of the shame, and actually believe that they can do it. That is literally the first step, because it's like that saying, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And that is true when it comes to
Mm.
getting out of debt too, because if from the beginning you don't think you're going to be able to pay it off, you're not going to pay it off, is the reality.
In terms of tackling debt, saving for an emergency fund, and investing, some people feel stuck. So I've got debt,
Mm,
but I want to save an emergency fund and I also want to invest.
mm.
How do you go about advising someone in that situation?
Yeah, I would say you need this solid foundation first. Is my point of view. I would say investing is later on, once you've sorted out your foundational things first. So otherwise, because what you tend to find is the money you're paying in interest on this debt is the money that you think you would be making through investing. So I think get your foundations right first. So that starter emergency fund, like you spoke about, would be the first step I would advise you to take. So getting used to having your own money and using your own money to bail yourself out, as opposed to relying on credit, I think is a great first step. So even if it's £500, £1,000, whatever you can save quite quickly in order to have that bit of a
Mm.
security blanket and make you feel a bit more financially stable. So the tire goes in your car, you know that you have that emergency fund that you can quickly use to pay for it, as opposed to thinking, oh my gosh, what cards can I try and get money on in order
So,
to
sorry,
pay for
just to
it?
clarify, so have an emergency fund, build that well to a certain amount while still tackling the debt.
I would do that before even paying off more than the initial minimum payments on the debt. So I would still pay the minimum payments on my debt. Don't not pay your debt, because you're gonna get yourself into trouble. But I would say get that little starter emergency fund in place. And I say that just because of, like I said, so that when an emergency does arise, you're not having to now go back and that
Mm.
credit that you just paid off, that credit card that you've just been paying off, you're not having to use it again because you don't have any kind of reserve. So that's why I'd say have that little bit of reserve first, and then literally try and pay off that debt, sorry, as fast as you can, and then invest in, start doing that small as well. Some people, again, this is just my preference. Different financial coaches might say different things, but for me, I feel like have your foundation stable first before you start building, because otherwise, yeah, you're just like trying to build when you still got stuff that you need to address, if that makes
So
sense.
have my emergency fund,
Mm.
continue to tackle my debt. Once the debt is 100% cleared,
Yeah,
then
the
start
high interest consumer debt, I would say. So, like, not your mortgage, for example. That one you can obviously going to be paying for a long, long time. But any credit cards, overdrafts, all of those things that have high
clear
interest
that
fees, pay
with
that. Yeah,
immediate effect
yeah.
before beginning to
Because
invest.
then you'll have a lot more money to invest anyway once you've paid off those debts, right? So all those hundreds of pounds that you were paying off in debt every month, suddenly you have now all that extra money, which you can straight away start investing. And yeah, that's a whole nother conversation in terms of how to
Yeah.
invest that money, right? But yeah, you can start on that journey.
So how do you help someone shift their mindset from a position of feeling powerless over their finances
Mm.
to a feeling of confidence and having control?
How do I shift their mindset? I think that's a good question. And I think a lot of it is an internal thing that people have to do, right? So I can't do it for you, but I can encourage you and give you the tools to do it. So things like the words that you speak are very important. So if you, like I said before, you're saying, oh, I'm never going to pay this debt, I'm never going to be debt free, you just have that negative belief, your actions are going to follow the way
Mm.
you think, right? Whereas if you're saying, no, I can pay off this debt, I'm going to do whatever I can to pay off this debt, suddenly you start thinking of ideas as to how you can make this a reality. Suddenly you go from, oh my gosh, I can't pay this debt off, to actually, that dress, I haven't worn that dress in ages, I'm going to put it on Vinted. Actually, in the evenings, rather than me watching Netflix for 5 hours, I can do some deliveries for Amazon Flex and make extra money to pay off this debt faster. Suddenly you start looking for solutions, right, to pay it off. But it starts with you telling yourself that you can do it, and actually then letting your actions follow what you're saying and you hopefully believe to be true. If that makes sense.
100%. So It starts off internally
Yeah,
first. So in terms of what we're trying to achieve externally,
yeah.
it first starts off
You have to make that
internally,
shift
and
yourself.
you have to have a mindset shift
Mhm.
and have the confidence that you're going to actually, work towards clearing that debt.
Exactly. And I think once you start making those little tiny steps, it builds that evidence, right? And that evidence compounds over time. So what I used to do when we was on our debt-free journeys, I had these debt-free trackers and it basically had the credit card amount on it. And then you have like coloring in boxes, very childish, but very effective. So you color it in every time you pay a certain amount towards that debt. So visually you can see the progress that you're making. So once you've paid off 200, 300, 400, you're seeing more and more of the picture become complete. And that just, again, is that visual representation showing you that actually I am making progress. I'm moving forward. If I've paid off 500, I can pay off another 500. And yeah, it just gives you that evidence that you can do it and it keeps you motivated and empowered to continue on that journey.
Yeah. So the more you take steps to tackle your debt and you're seeing that progress,
Hmm.
it gives you the confidence to keep on eliminating the debt
Exactly.
and arguably more confidence in managing your money and managing your finances generally.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you have a vision, you have something you're working towards, it's easier to say no to other things because it's like, actually, I have a plan for my money now. I can see that by me making the sacrifice here, by me, I don't know, going from shopping at Waitrose to shopping at Tesco or whatever, me making these shifts, I can see the impact it's having on my overall finances. And I like the way I'm feeling. So I'm going to continue to do more of it. And that's how you, before you know it, you just see yourself pay that debt off in a faster amount of time than you could have ever anticipated. And I think since I've been in this finance space and been in the debt free community online, I've just heard so many testimonies and so many examples of people that have been able to pay off even larger amounts of debt than I have been able to pay off in shorter spaces of time. And again, it's because, not again, this is the next point, is the community that you get around yourself
Okay.
as well. Surrounding yourself with like-minded people definitely helps as well on that debt-free journey. So once I immerse myself in that UK debt-free community, you start finding other people that are on similar journeys, that are doing things that you're doing. You get ideas from them, inspiration from them, and motivation from them to continue on your journey, because you see people, they have like in their bios trackers of how much of their debt they've paid off, and it just gives you that encouragement that, okay, if X, Y, and Z can do it, so can I do it too. And then it gives you that
So
motivation to
your
continue.
network and your community
Exactly.
matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes a big difference on what you're able to achieve, because you can go further faster, right? When you have the right community around you.
Okay. And what would you say to, one of your clients that are struggling with, overspending or
Mm,
impulse buying? I'm going window shopping, but it's not really window
mm.
shopping. They're actually touching down and making transactions.
Yeah, that was me. That is me still at heart, to be honest. I'm an overspender at heart, but I have to rein it in. I think, again, going back to points I made before in terms of having your goals, like knowing what you're working towards, it really does help you to say no to certain things. Because, for example, if you're saving up towards this holiday that you want to take, you've always said, I want to go to the Maldives, and you're saving towards it, you know that every time I'm making this impulse purchase, it's delaying the savings time for me to achieve this goal of going to the Maldives. It makes you think twice about making that purchase. Another thing that I tell clients to do is track their spending. And that's something that I used to do a lot as well. And it's such an eye opener, tracking your spending and also looking back at your bank statements and seeing where all your money is going. When I was realizing how much money I was giving to McDonald's on a monthly basis, I had to make some changes. So I was like, how am I spending £200 at McDonald's in 1 month? That's insanity.
Hold on, is this that if you and your
I mean,
partner
me
or
and the kids. No,
the
no, yeah,
family?
me,
Oh,
not
okay,
just me
cool. Just to
eating two
clarify.
hundred pounds, but even so, that is still a lot of money to spend in 1 month for McDonald's, and it's not just like 2 trips. It's literally like 2 times a week. I would be going to McDonald's drive-through on the
Because
way
it's
home.
easy.
Exactly, it's just easy, convenient, and but when you sit down and look at the numbers, you're like, no, no, this doesn't make sense. Do you know what I could have done with that £200? And I've just given it to McDonald's. No, I could have gone to McDonald's once, maybe spent £30, and the other 170 I could have put towards something that was even more important to me. So I think, yeah, definitely that helps as well. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, I think that does make a big difference.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm a minimalist. I don't
Yeah.
even own much. However, I still have items in my wardrobe with tags on, and I'm like, Steph, come on now, what are you
Mm,
doing? So, my plan is over this weekend
mm,
to do a declutter. Some
mm,
stuff I'm gonna, give to charity. Some stuff I'm gonna try and sell on Vinted. But yeah, even me as a minimalist, I
mm.
overspend at times,
Of
and so I
course.
need to definitely continue with my, monthly reviews and rein it
Mm.
in because ultimately you don't need all this stuff, right?
We don't. If you set yourself a challenge today and said, I'm not gonna go shopping again for the next 12 months, you would survive and you'll still look good. You'll still go out and you'll still look good, right? So you just know that we don't need all the stuff we're buying. But marketing, social media, all of these things just make us think we always need more when actually we have more than enough.
100%. And I think COVID as well taught us how much, we don't need.
Right?
You know,
When they took it all
I
away
was
from
I
us.
was in leggings and a hoodie, throughout the COVID season. So my next question is for those with irregular incomes. So for
Mm,
instance, those, who are freelancers, those who have small
yeah.
businesses, what strategies would you, advise, a freelancer or those, with a small business to help with managing debt and also saving?
Mm. So I would say when
Because
you
the income is irregular. It's not.
exactly, it's irregular, but you have a minimum amount that you've achieved that you've received, right? So if you look at your budget for the last 12 months, or you look at your bank statements rather, because you maybe you haven't created a budget before, but if you look at your income for the last 12 months, how much have you received on a monthly basis? Write that all down on paper. And the smallest amount is what you want to now use to create your budget. So that's kind of like a bare bones budget. That's the bare minimum you're expecting to receive for that
Okay.
month that
Okay.
you're going to use to manage your finances. And then what you want to do is once you've allocated that to your different budget categories, when the money does come in, if it's more than that, which it will be because you budgeted based on the lowest amount you could
Wow.
possibly get, right? You have extra money to now play with. So that money can then go towards the things that are not needs, rather your wants. So any save holiday that you want to put towards a new car, saving for your new home, whatever it is, that money can then be allocated to those different categories. Or you might even want to increase the bare bones budget categories. So let's say you've allocated £200 for food because that's all you could afford on that month that your income was the lowest.
Lowest.
Then you can be like, okay, I'll allocate a bit more to food this month because there's more money that's come in. But once you have that bare bones budget that you're working with, okay, my fixed expenses, my basic essential expenses are covered. And then you're going to allocate the rest of it to whatever categories that you have left available with the money that's left.
To cover some debts and also
So,
save.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Credit cards. I know you've touched on
Mm,
this earlier, but it is a huge problem.
mm.
People constantly tapping down with their credit cards, overspending beyond how much they actually get paid. How or, what strategies do you suggest for people who are constantly overspending or over relying on credit cards?
To be honest, it's hard. Like if you had asked me this question 3 years ago, my answer would have been a bit different to what it is now, because back then I had less grace for people. Whereas now I recognize in these economic times, people are barely able to pay their bills, let alone now have money to live, right? And if
Mm.
you've got children and all the rest of it, that's even additional expenses that people don't have enough to cover. So I do appreciate that it's easier to rely on a credit card. But what I would say, if you are one of those people in that position, is that getting more credit and spending more credit is just making the situation worse. It's not going to improve the situation for you. So it is time to put a pause on it. Maybe that credit card, cut it up, leave it in the house if you have to, give it to a family member. I've seen like videos where people put in a freezer in a block of ice so you can't use it. Whatever you have to do so that you're not getting any more debt, that's what you want to do. So that's the first thing. So you put a pause on it, right? Because once that option is gone, you'll be surprised at the ideas that start coming to you. So going back to what I was saying to you before, when you start thinking, I don't have a way out, that's the brain gives up. The brain doesn't think of a way out, right? But once you start thinking, I need a solution, you will be surprised at the solutions that you start coming up with, right? So suddenly you start becoming more resourceful. That Amazon delivery that you was just about to order on a credit card, you think, actually, do I need to buy that item on Amazon? What do I have in my house that I can use as an alternative? What about if I go on Facebook Marketplace? Maybe I could do a swap with somebody. There's websites like Too Good to Go to Waste where you can go. They even have these what do they call them? Community fridges where you can go and do food swaps. Local food banks as well now in the area that you can go to get food. So there's other options that you can go to before just automatically going for that credit card. So yeah, I would say definitely just pause on it and start thinking about what alternative can I do. Start thinking about the skills that you have, the things that you can do to make additional money on the side. Because if the money is too tight and right now you feel like you can barely make ends meet, then you'll be surprised that again, if you start thinking about what you can do
Do.
to make extra money, the ideas that start coming to you. Cooking, is that your thing? Are you really great at cooking? Meal prepping. Maybe you can start meal prepping for some of the parents at school that work full time, that don't have the time to cook. Like, ideas will come to you if you sit down and
Creative
search for them.
strategies, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Start thinking of them so that you can make additional money so that you don't rely on credit card. Believe it or not, once upon a time, there wasn't a thing called credit, right? And we survived, or the people before us survived,
True.
right? But we've just become so dependent on it and so, yeah, reliant on credit when actually we can use each other as well, use your community, friends. So even like down to clothes for the kids, right? Do you know how many friends I have that have older boys that give me stuff for the kids?
Oh, that's amazing.
And I take the clothes. Once upon a time, maybe 5, 6 years ago, I would have been like, no, no, I'm not gonna put my kids in your hand-me-downs. But actually it's clothes. The clothes are in good condition. Why can't they wear it?
Yeah,
Do you know what I
washed, dry
mean?
cleaned.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then just use the stuff rather than every time thinking I need to buy brand new everything. Not everything needs to be brand new. Like, we have enough resources between us that we can just pull from without actually always needing to buy things new, especially if it means that we're doing it on credit.
No, this conversation is needed, especially
Mm,
in our community, because as I said earlier, people are heavily reliant on
mm,
credit cards. And as you say, it gets you into a cycle of decline and you can't get out of it. Well, if you're not careful, you can't get out of it and you're losing sleep over money. And money, it's a tool, right? It's a medium of
mm,
exchange, but we need to be more responsible in our use of it. So thank you so much. I
mhm.
just wanted to ask you, as we're bringing this podcast to a close, are there any specific apps, tools, or books that you would recommend to help people with managing their personal finances?
I mean, I can plug my budget template. It's I have on my website if anyone wants to check it out. It's the budget template that I use to manage my finances. But beyond that, there's budgeting apps like Emma, which is a really good budgeting app in the UK. You can literally, if you're a person that doesn't do Excel spreadsheets and all the rest of it, it's an app that links to your bank account. So it helps you to categorize your spending and you can see exactly where your money is. And you can also create a budget in there and create a plan for your money. So Emma's a great app you can use. And in terms of financial education, there's so many podcasts and platforms that you can tune into. I mean, I've got my podcast, Not Another Money podcast, which you can listen to. Pete Matthews has a great one. He's called The Meaningful Money. I think that's the name of his podcast.
Meaningful money.
Well, he's got a book anyway, The Meaningful Money Handbook, which is really great. And it's UK specific as well. So a lot of the books that were out there before were all US based, whereas he was like one of the first ones to do it to the UK audience. So it's really good. It does everything from debt to budgeting to will to saving, investing, everything is covered in that book. But also Emmanuel Suko has one, Get Your Money Right, I think it's called. That's a really good book as well. Selena has one, Black Girl Finance UK, of course. So yeah, Black Girl Finance, that's a really good book as well. There's loads of books, there's loads of resources. We live in an information age right now. So there really is no
There's no
excuse. We
excuse.
have access to all the information. You just have to go out there, read it, but not just read it, apply what you listen to or what you read as well. And then the information is there and the help is available. You've got Citizens Advice as well. Step Change is a debt charity which you can check out. Go on their website. They can actually help you create a budget. They can help you
Oh,
to
that's
understand your debts, even speak to your creditors on your behalf if you're scared to reach out to them. Because yeah, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, there's loads of help available,
no,
loads of
thank you
resources.
so much, Tolu. Honestly, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me on this podcast today. This conversation is needed. I don't think it's going to be the end of our conversation on finance. I think it's important for us to continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Um, for me, you've provided, a number of strategies and actions that, our audience can take away and start implementing straight away. And all I can say is thank you. Thank you for taking the time out today and joining me on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on, Stephanie. I've really, really, really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, I'm excited for the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.